Hi, friends, and welcome back. This is the Tommy Obenchain podcast. I'm delighted to be back with you in my home, in my garage, in Dallas right now. Seat 1A. It's good to be here together. And it's nice to be not on the road momentarily. I'm actually flying out tomorrow. Almost got a mosquito there to, where are we flying tomorrow? To Minneapolis, then on to Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. Great place. And in that, get to ride on Atlanta Magic known as Delta, which is kind of fun if you're me because I grew up going to the lake, as we call it in my family, on none other than Northwest Airlines, as they kind of ruled the day and the sky in the Midwest, which was neat. So Minneapolis was their home field hub, and we'd fly red Northwest and then silver and red Northwest, the red tail, up to Minneapolis, and then if you were so desired, on to Fargo from there. And tomorrow we're flying Delta, who also has a red livery, but very much Atlanta's airline, to Minneapolis because they bought Delta back in, what was that, 2007, 2008? I think 8. Anyways, yes, that's right. And in all cases, that 2008 buy was kind of a question, like what would this be? It was the first of like the mergers that have carried us into the really kind of modern aviation industry that is today's U.S. airline industry. And it went so well for Northwest is really what's true. And you get some folks who are negative to that end. And I've heard an acronym thrown around by legacy Northwest pilots. They call themselves nerds, never ever really Delta. And that's cute. And I'm sure to a degree kind of true in their world. But in that same token, there's a lot of great, not good, great that has come from the merger, specifically for the people of Northwest and the hubs of Northwest and the airline that was Northwest and now is Delta in the States and Delta across the world. Probably the biggest casualty, actually, of the whole thing, and I've talked about this on the blog, is Northwest hub in Tokyo, which Delta effectively dismantled along with their crew bases in Asia. And that was a real, not just kind of cost of the merger, so to say, but a reality that was faced by the industry at large, as when Northwest built their really kind of jewel asset that was the crown jewel asset that was the Tokyo hub. It was back when 747s crossed the Pacific, and those airplanes just had all this capacity and legs that kind of could barely extend deep into Asia, and really were just very large airplanes in that same token, very purpose built for a lot of different missions, but also revolved around the hub traffic that Northwest built at Narita, which was well done to their end. And there was a time when Northwest was the second most popular airline in Japan. They flew so much international traffic in and out of Japan, not just to and from the States, but truly across Asia. Yeah, fascinating point on that. Northwest actually flew at a point in time, very short, but from Osaka to Australia. And I'm fairly confident the route was Osaka to Sydney. And now I'm saying that out loud and thinking, no, I think maybe Melbourne. Doesn't really matter insofar as just their Pacific network was kind of incredible. And if I'm not mistaken, that airplane went from New York to Osaka and then onward from there to Australia. And it was incredible at the time and kind of a big deal for a U.S. carrier to get to serve that route and carry traffic in both directions. I think it was kind of a contested item in Japan. Why is this U.S. carrier being given traffic rights on a route that they don't need to serve Australia by way of Japan? They could do it from their own continental shores, which, if I'm not mistaken, Northwest did as well at the time. Anyways, Northwest was a pretty fascinating storied airline based out of Minneapolis, and an airline very much in my childhood who I really have a lot of shared memory with. My first 747 flight was on Northwest, and so in that place, I love that airline, and I love flying to Minneapolis because of the airport that it is and the piece of aviation history that it, at least to me, is kind of representative of. And the airline that Northwest was really this vanguard across the Pacific in no uncertain term. And now Delta being this very globally known and in many ways renowned carrier. Some will dispute that point, and that's fair because, well, that's fair. But in the same place, you cannot miss the fact that Northwest was in a fairly dire place before the Northwest merger by many counts, and now the airline and the overall health of the airline, Northwest and Delta together, really is quite healthy. So I'm excited to fly Delta. We're on a brand new A220 tomorrow on the short hop from Dallas to Minneapolis. I believe our stage length is just over 2 hours gate to gate. So to my understanding, just under 2 hours in the air. We'll see. But looking forward to it almost as much as my daughters are, which is, if you're me, kind of fun. And that's where we're headed and where we're coming in from. This week I actually was just finishing up my 7 flights on Southwest in how many days? just a few. 5 days, I think, in total. It was supposed to be 7, and then the kind of total duration got cut a bit short, which was a great thing because it gave me a little more time at home. But in that place, quite a few flights on Southwest, and I've spoken about this already, so I'll leave it briefly. But one thing I've thought about, I really had a wonderful time on Southwest. The people of Southwest still very much are the people of that airline. Very much kind of the brand's ethos lives on in the people of the airline, and my hope is that the changes that their current management is seeking to enact do not steal that from the carrier. But it is a precarious thing, to be sure. And we'll see. I don't know, but I'm grateful to be on Southwest and had a really wonderful series of flights with them, to be sure. And that's the key takeaway. They've still got the love to my flying and my time on board. And I'm grateful for and still a believer in Southwest. And living less than 10 minutes away from Dallas Love Field Airport, it is a delight to get to fly in and out of Love Field because it feels like flying in and out of like the house next door to your backyard, which is silly and kind of real, and I am grateful. With that, one thing I wanted to make a note of, I was thoughtful towards this, being in and out of Vegas most recently, and I have a little bit of history at the airport as it was the airport I flew one of my initial operating experience flights on United to. I was thinking about being a flight attendant for United and then, being a flight attendant for Southwest, and I, in a kind of different world, would have just absolutely loved to be a flight attendant for Southwest because they are such a fun airline and culture to be a part of is what's true, and you can tell their crews have a lot of fun taking care of people and just kind of being themselves on the airplane. And I would have delighted in getting to do so in a, like, no uncertain terms since. Would have been a blast. I think about it like in a very, like, think about it not infrequently. Would have been so fun being a flight attendant for Southwest. But one thing I was struck by this week specifically was just I've spoken about this, the pleasantness of the Southwest experience and how generally kind of common it is, right? Like in the sense, like it's a common piece of common aircraft type, common cabin type. You don't have variability. It's simple, better said than common. Common sounds pejorative. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but I do mean there's a simplicity to their operation that makes it kind of interchangeable. So as a result, like you want to change flights, good. You don't have to worry about like not having this seat or these amenities or what have you. The only thing that really does change right now within their fleet is the availability of in-seat power, which does matter on longer stage lengths, coupled with the quality of the Wi-Fi overall. My flying this weekend was during a trial of free Wi-Fi they were offering on board their planes to Rapid Reward members. A great and kind of moving, when will they offer free Wi-Fi is really the question, trend in the industry. And it's a great way to acquire new customers into your loyalty program. That's a topic for another podcast. But in the point that I'm making is just that it was interesting to see it trialed as Delta offers free Wi-Fi. United is in the process of rolling that out to Mileage Plus members. American similarly will begin in January offering free Wi-Fi to Advantage members. Southwest obviously is taking that seriously for Rapid Rewards members. And the Wi-Fi on my planes, when the Wi-Fi was offered for free, was virtually unusable, which isn't a knock as much as it just is like that's what it was. And so in that place, it was both fun and interesting to appreciate that there are some elements of the Southwest experience that are not common aircraft to aircraft, notably in-seat power and the quality of the Wi-Fi. I do understand there are airplanes in their fleet that have Viasat as the Wi-Fi provider on board. They are much more robust than the alternative, which is more broadly used across their fleet, which is called like Anku or something. I don't know, but in all instances, it's not as good. And that was especially the case this weekend. Actually, this week when I was flying, when Wi-Fi was chargeable, it was much more tenable. So your mileage might vary, but that's an item for someone else to figure out, not for me. Interesting. I was making a point, purely Southwest and the commonality of the aircraft type, the simplicity of their operation. As a flight attendant, what I was struck by was, I wonder if this ever gets boring, because your flights could kind of all blend into one. And to be fair, like if you just fly, a certain route at United, insofar as like you kind of pick like, hey, this is the type of flying I just do domestic flying, or I just do if I just fly Hong Kong, I'm super senior. Anyways, the point I'm making is that at a point it kind of all does become like your living room, and I felt that at United for sure. But I really enjoyed the variety. You could work in economy on a domestic flight. You could work in premium economy, or you would work in business class. Or I'm sorry, I'm not saying the right terminology. You work domestic economy. You would work domestic premium cabin, first class. You could work international business class. At the time, we had an international first class. I was not around when we rolled out when the premium plus cabin came online. That was after my time at United, and Polaris was kind of a new-ish thing. And so I didn't spend much time. I actually have not been on the new Polaris product yet, which is kind of embarrassing to me, but it doesn't matter. It just is what it is. And in all cases, I so enjoyed the range of flying. You had transatlantic flying, you had trans-Pacific flying, you had South American flying. You just had all of these different elements of the product that kind of had to stretch into different geographies, cultures, aircraft types, markets. And product and cabin types, which made it kind of fun. Made it a little more to think about. You kind of couldn't just ad lib it, so to say. Running a business class service does take a distinct level of coordination and effort in a pretty consolidated time basis specifically, and that's true as well in a lot of different settings, both within the broad airline industry, within in-flight service, and for sure at United. And Southwest product is literally ubiquitous. They have a slightly larger snack selection on their Hawaii flying, and that's it, which is really neat. And they have great crews and, relatively neat layovers. It's all domestic though, right? It just is interesting to me. Very different. So that was cool to appreciate and fun to talk about here. Thank you. A slight reflection on being a flight attendant, United versus Southwest, and where I wondered as I was getting off the plane last night, thinking of our crew who was headed on to Albuquerque. I thought they're going to do the same thing again for the next 2 hours. Like this is it. This is all they do. That's interesting. That's different. I don't know what that's like. Not exactly, at least. Okay, so Southwest, thank you. Many great flights together, and excited for more to come, which will be fun. On that, I was in Las Vegas yesterday and got to try out whilst there both the brand new Capital One Lounge that just opened in Las Vegas, as well as the American Express Centurion Lounge, which was the first Centurion Lounge to open globally insofar as the new Centurion Lounge concept is concerned. They are going to open the Centurion Sidecar product in Las Vegas, and evidently initially first, which will be kind of a sit-down restaurant style, more of a fast just kind of faster and dining only, to my understanding, or something like that, lounge experience. I'm really excited to see that product, but it's going to open in Vegas, so it's kind of clearly a market where you're testing lounge products. It's my understanding Capital One is working on getting a lounge there, or I'm sorry, not Capital One, excuse me, Chase, having one of their Sapphire Reserve, as they call them, I believe, lounges there, as they're also working on one in Dallas, and it's going to be fun to see that product in that market, as I'm sure it'll be successful. But both the Capital One Lounge and the American Express Lounge were crowded to the point there was a wait list to get into both the day I was leaving on, that was Saturday, and it was, Sunday. And it was just interesting to appreciate, this is kind of peak time at these lounges, and so good on them, good-o, as you'd say in Australia. They, maybe not, I don't know, I don't speak Australian, but the point is that they were, kind of restricting access. And so as a result of, with both instances, I was able to get on the app, Capital One app and American Express app, because of my VentureX card and my American Express Platinum card, respectively, and just put myself on the wait list. And it was very funny because as I got to the American Express Lounge, kind of to do so, I wanted to check with them. Their app's a little different. I couldn't see how long the wait was. I'm telling this wrong. I got on the Capital One app, then my phone died. I was a total just novice traveler. My phone died, so I didn't get to get on the American Express app. So I went in person to the American Express Lounge, just because I was already on the wait list, Capital One, walked over, let's see how I fare at Amex. And the people at Amex were a little, you can tell they've just been berated longer. They weren't as maybe just, gentil as the people at the Capital One Lounge insofar as the wait was concerned. They're like, it's going to be at least an hour, hour and a half, kind of almost the point of you shouldn't even try. And I was like, no big deal. That's great. Just put me on the list. Thank you so much. And they were, they weren't unkind, so to say, but they definitely weren't effusive, we're, doing everything we can to get you in. It was kind of you better wait, which is their prerogative at least, and probably more a reflection of just how berated they are by card members wondering why they have to wait to get in, which that's reasonable at the very least, as you kind of set this expectation of a lounge and then, in fact, I can't get in. It's a challenging dynamic for them. And where I'm going in that is that both lounges had waits. Capital One, they were like, it's going to be about 10 minutes. And then Amex said an hour. So this great gulf. And in fact, I ended up getting into the Amex lounge 10 minutes after they told me to wait. They just said, we'll send you a text. So I walked back to the Capital One Lounge thinking I'm about to get in there. Well, I was waiting at the front of the Capital One Lounge. I got a text, you're into the Centurion Lounge. So I said, great, I'm going to head back to Amex. And then I got a text 5 minutes later, we have a space for you at the Capital One Lounge. And I canceled the request because I'm already at the American Express Lounge. It was hilarious. And again, to American Express's credit, and I think this is the tension, I got in the lounge and it's not at all empty. It was full. Every seat in a certain capacity was taken, but it didn't feel like it was just overrun. They were cleaning it kind of concurrently, and it was still a pleasant environment, and I expect that's how Capital One is keeping it. But that place of, you have these credit cards that people are paying, $700, $695 a year in the case of the Amex card, $395 a year in the case of the VentureX card. You might hear me say that and think, Tommy, you're spending how much money a year? $1,100 a year, just under that, on credit cards. And that is a true statement right now. And I can break that down in another episode. The point, though, is you have these cards that are very premium that then people are expecting to get into the lounges, and, oh, wait, they're too crowded. I have to wait outside and then to get in. And it's not standing room only, but it's there are only a few spaces to sit because of how busy it is in here. I am definitely, appreciate the fact that that's not the first choice in a lounge experience. And I share all this to say that kind of I really wanted to answer a question on this episode of the podcast. Long story say, what's the question? Should have begun with an end in mind. Forgive me for not doing so. But I think the question really is like, what's the use of these lounges, and why spend all this money to then have to wait to get in? Well, I'll say two things. I have had great success this year, though I don't travel probably at just peak periods all the time in getting in. This was the first time this year. Second time this year, I've had to wait to get into one of these lounges. So on balance, like I do travel with a reasonable regularity, and I'm typically finding, especially during off-peak periods, very easy to get in and out. So peak periods, it's harder. I don't travel during many peak periods. I can't speak to it all the time, but there definitely are better times than others to get in. And then this is probably the bigger side of the coin. Between Party Pass and having multiple premium cards, I feel like it even opens your doors even more, where there's kind of always a lounge to get in. And again, that's not, always the case. But I find that then the lounges, when they're space controlled, actually have a better quality experience inside, which I like. And I think that's really kind of something to take not for granted, because that wasn't always the case. That used to just be like, everyone comes in and they're like standing room only at the Centurion lounge and plates and trash everywhere. Why do you like that's not premium? I think they've found at least some level of medium as they continue to kind of solve for how do we manage crowding at these lounges. And I don't have an answer on this, but to note that for me, the availability of a lounge coupled with Priority Pass, which gets you into kind of sidecar lounges that are not sidecar, just other lounges that are generally not as busy in my limited experience. That's, again, not always the case, but you're just giving yourself more option, coupled with kind of, managing expectations and traveling at points during off-peak times. You can really get great access still to these lounges. And the lounges themselves are, I would genuinely say, better than ever. Like, you've got great food that is truly good, better than like what the lounge experience food was, a decade ago, before, a little more than that, before these lounges came on the scene. They've kind of been a common tide that's lifted everyone. And then you've got an experience that actually is trying to keep up with the fact that there's a lot of demand for it. And that, again, is made for a generally good lounge experience. Is it a bummer if the only time you travel is during peak times and it's hard to get into a Centurion lounge or a Chase Sapphire Reserve lounge or a Capital One lounge? Yes, it is. Are these lounges better when they're not just packed full of people? Yes. What is the balance point for a lounge to feel like it has kind of a gentle and rarefied air, and it's not just overrun with people, but it's also profitable for the operators so that it can stay in business? I actually would kind of like to know. I think there's probably a balance point that is less occupancy than what you're currently seeing that would give a kind of a richer experience. And is that something that you'd pay a premium for? Would I pay a premium for it? I don't know. It's an interesting question again, and I think it's one that I'm curious to kind of dialogue on more. But I, especially flying a little more Southwest than normal, was in and out of airports like, for instance, Austin, where I didn't have access to a lounge, and there's not a credit card lounge, and I didn't have access to an Admiral's Club or a Sky Club or something like that, where you would kind of go. And I was struck by how I needed to get food in the terminal. Same thing happened to me at Oakland's airport the night before. My flight was later than there was an escape lounge, which is such a funny lounge name, at Oakland's airport, but it had closed by the time that my flight was leaving. So I had to buy dinner in the concourse, and I was just like, whoa, airport food is so expensive. I have not bought airport food in such a long time because I'm able to make use of these lounges. And that really did kind of reset my paradigm on what the value of these were. And that was interesting to appreciate. So in all of this, is there value? Yes. Do I get tremendous value out of having access to American Express and Capital One's kind of premium lounge options? Yes, I would genuinely like to have access to Chase's, because the Chase Sapphire Reserve lounges in my limited experience really are quite quality. Do I need them? Probably not. Does Southwest and flying Southwest remind me that you can enjoy an airport without a lounge? Substantially so. The airline lounge the lounge at Love Field is the Starbucks. So there's two that kind of sit in each of the two different piers of the concourse. And it's great because you can get to Love Field 40 minutes before your flight, clear security, grab your coffee, get on the plane, and you're gone, right? It's quite pleasant is what's true. So it was interesting to appreciate yesterday the credit card experience. I don't have an answer to my question, is it worth it? For me, it is. I don't have an answer for you. For me, it is. And that's kind of a function of my travel habits. What is the true premium lounge experience? Is it out there? I think it's interesting because it is when the airports aren't busy. But when they are, and those lounges get so busy, it at some point becomes something closer to like, a TGI Fridays or a Chili's than it does kind of, a premium airport lounge. And if that's what it takes for lounges to be profitable, then kind of so be it. Is that what it takes for the lounges to be profitable? That's the question I'd like an answer to. And I don't have one tonight, so I'll work on getting one. And I'll leave you with that. This has been the Tommy Obenchain podcast, coming to you from Dallas, headed to Minnesota. and grateful to be with you. Thank you for flying with me here. We'll catch you in the next episode.